Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Today is July 26th, and this is another installment of SIG Apps bi-weekly call. My name is Maciej, and I'll be your host today. I don't have any particular announcements. We are after feature freeze, after test freeze for 122. So at most, the only thing that can happen is SIG release will ask you to help with solving any particular issues with tests. But when I was looking last time, it looked pretty okay. So we are slowly ramping up 123. And so the discussion elements I'm gonna cover in a bit will be touching 123 mostly in a lot of the topics. Unless Janet or Ken want to add something with regards to announcements.
No, let's jump right into discussion, I think.
Cool. So there's one quick topic, which is the delete all terminated pods flag for KCM. I believe, not sure if we have the author. But basically the idea is currently we have a flag that is terminated pod GC threshold, which Aldo pointed out as well in the PR. But someone is proposing to have a Boolean flag, which would say all terminated pods are removed, which, as I mentioned, Aldo pointed out, will break jobs until this point, and we are, or specifically Aldo is working on changing how jobs are working. And secondly, there's a question why or what's wrong with using the value 1, which is like literally having just one terminated pod, which would be almost meaning terminate all instead of introducing a new flag. I'm not sure if the author of the PR is there. Does anyone have any other thoughts on this PR?
I'd really like to see a cap for this.
Yeah, okay. So
I mean,
we will...
like, it doesn't have to be a huge cap, but like, I'd like to, I think SIG Apps should be involved in this. I think probably cluster lifecycle would also want to be involved in this. So I think at least both of our SIG should be there. And like I think the author of the PR doesn't understand that this would be a user-facing change from a behavioral standpoint, because they list it as none on the PR. So I'd like to see a cap. So like, if nobody minds, I actually would like to put that request as feedback on the PR real quick and go from there. I'm not opposed to doing it in general, but I think at least thinking about like how we're going to roll this out and so forth makes sense.
And especially how this will affect the current controllers and everything else. And what's the use case? Why using the current flag isn't sufficient to achieve removing all terminated pods. Yeah, okay, thanks, Ken. Okay, that moves us to the second topic. Aldo, you had a topic about usage patterns for job API.
Yes, so I just wanted to open the discussion about whether the job API could be an underlying API for any kind of job, any kind of batch job. In this case, the TensorFlow operator. So with the introduction of index jobs, we kind of have the possibility of enabling training tasks where every pod has an identifiable name you can use to communicate between them. But then, so I brought this up to the Kubeflow community, and they were interested in lifting the job API to handle pod management. I mean, for example, I don't quickly I read the code. I don't think they handle the problem we just had, right, about terminated pods. And I think it wouldn't be it would be hard for every operator to deal with this kind of low level nuance about tracking jobs. So as a whole, I think there is a chance for having a low level API, job API, yeah, but that can still serve higher level operations. So, well, back to the point, what are the missing features in job API that we don't have today? So I did a quick survey of what those features are. So the first one is being able to resize jobs. So basically changing the completions field. Um, I think in general, this is a breaking change. But I talked to some API reviewers, and basically, if the controller today can handle it, the job controller can handle this sudden change, we should be able to do it. It's if it doesn't break anything. If not, we have to do it across two versions. First, to fix the job controller to be able to do it, and then only the next version we can have the API permit it.
The API change wouldn't
Yes.
be breaking because you would be making a currently immutable field mutable, which is permissible. You just can't go the other way.
Right.
But all the other stuff you said is relevant. We know that it does not handle this today, right? Like, as far as I'm aware, there's like, if you change the parallelism of a job, the controller is not going to be sensitive to it, which is why it's blocked for mutation at the API level.
So I think I fixed that last release, but I will have to do experiments. But yeah,
Parallelism, parallelism should be supported even in the old control, even before your changes, if I
I
remember
mean,
correctly. Because
completions. I misspoke.
yeah, completions, I'm not sure about that one. Theoretically, it should work. My only worry would be that if people are expecting this to be immutable, and eventually the only one where this could affect how you are running is if someone is expecting that it will never ever change, and suddenly halfway through your job, you're changing the field. But that will be only on the consumer side of things, but not in the controller, I think.
right. Yeah, I guess this change would need a cut, but I
Yes.
guess we could discuss through that. Uh, anyway, so that's first change. That's probably the easiest one, to be honest. Then the next one is a little bit more about job completion or job retrying. So yeah, basically the idea that if a pod fails, there are some operations that could be retried, and there are some cases where we cannot retry, and we can base that on exit code. So they do that in TensorFlow operator. The way they do it is just kill the pod, so it gets recreated. And if it's a non-recoverable error, they don't do anything. So that's the second feature. I think that one requires more work. How do we support it? Like which exit codes? Maybe it's a list of exit codes that are retriable. There are many ways.
Question about that. So like really the way all of the controllers are dealt with today is restarts are pretty much handled on the kubelet side, right? So you have restart always and restart never, and there's nothing in between. We're not talking about changing the potential modes for kubelet to try to restarting. We would be actually relaunching a pod from the job controller.
Yeah, which we actually do today, even if you have the restart policy as never. The job controller still recreates the pod if it failed.
Yeah.
But I might be wrong on that, actually.
No. That's what we do today. But like, we don't have any notion of acceptable failure. So you're really just talking about adding acceptable failure, retriable failure versus terminal failure to the job API in some way.
Yeah, that would be handled by job controller. And I actually dug up the RFE that I was talking with Eric Toon 6 years ago, where we were talking through an ability to have a set of, in that particular case, it was about when a job should be marked as failed because of the exit codes, but that would slowly, that would touch basically on your topic, although your topic would be a little bit more expand on this idea.
Yes. So this will be.
I'll link that RFE into the agenda notes so that you can have a look at it. It just Brian commented that they have something in Google of for Borg, which does something similar. Although I think that we initially talked about a single exit code, but I'm pretty sure that there's nothing stopping us from adding a set of either a range of codes or whatever.
Cool, thank you. So the last issue I can bring up is the ability to mark a job as completed with less than 100% of the pods completed. I assume if you're like doing some kind of
that's already there. That's already there. Yeah. So if you
maybe I don't understand what you're asking. How is it different from what we do today? It would be my question.
Today, you have to have all the pods completed for a completion number. You have to have all of them completed to declare the job completed.
So that not quite. There is an option that you do not set a completion field, if I remember correctly, which basically means the first completed pod will mark the job completed. Doesn't matter how many pods we run, and we will run this many as the parallelism says, but the first one that gets completed marks the entire job as completed. That's one of the sets that Eric was adding sometime after we initially wrote the job controller.
I see.
Would that work for you, or you need to have, I don't know, a particular number which is greater than just one?
Yes. And there's also the need for index jobs with this behavior.
So wait, to expand on that a little bit, I mean, job is actually counting the number of successful completions. So if you want the job to stop after a number of successful completions, like that's why I don't understand what you're asking, like what the ask is. Like, are they trying to say, what is the termination? What would be the modification and termination criteria? I guess I don't grok it.
Yeah, so I'm not fully aware of this need. I don't know all the details, but from my understanding is like, okay, I hit 80% of the pods completed successfully, then I can declare my job successful and I can cancel the rest of the pods.
Right, but you can achieve that through having, I don't know, parallelism 100 and completions at 80.
Yeah.
And that basically you're going to achieve the 80% rate because we're going to fire up 100 pods and only 80 will be counted to your successful run.
Are we?
At that point, the job is.
No, we don't fire. We fire.
We limit the number.
We fire the minimum of both numbers.
We do.
I'm pretty sure, especially around index jobs, because you only want the indexes that you define in completions to finish.
Okay. Regular job, I'm pretty sure when you specify the parallelism, we launch that parallelism, and we will try to get, like, if you say 100, we're going to get you 100 running pods, and then we're going to stop after 80% of them complete successfully, though index jobs may behave differently.
Okay. Actually, then
honestly, I would probably be okay with the first two. I'm not 100% sure about the third use case yet.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I can follow up on that one. I don't know all the details, and also I'm not sure how how the controller behaves when you have bigger number of parallelism than completions.
Yeah, that's
I
definitely
think
something that we would have to check. I'm pretty sure that we have some kind of a batching, but the batching is, I think, in hundreds. But I might be wrong. But eventually,
I
it
missed that
will.
word.
It is to ensure that we are not overwhelming the system with creating suddenly, I don't know, up to this many parallelism. So, for example, if the parallelism will be 1,000, we're not going to fire up 1,000 pods, but rather we will do it gradually. I don't know. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the batch size is, but it will be done, I don't know, 50, 100 a time.
Yeah, right.
And then
Yeah, I remember this.
and there will be a delay between those batches. I can't remember what's the mechanism behind the batching, whether there's some back off or it's just, yeah, I would have to dig it up. But there is there is a mechanism behind those.
Sounds good. Thank you. So yeah, to sum up, there are all these gaps. So the big question is, do you think it's advisable to make the Job API fulfill these gaps so that the Job API becomes the de facto underlying pod management for any kind of job? Do you share this view? Do you think we can progress towards this goal through the releases? This probably take a bunch of releases.
I'm pretty confident about the first two, like I mentioned before. These are in any way they are not nor breaking changes nor controversial. The third one is I'm missing the picture or a particular use case for the percentage of number of completions. So I would need to know a little bit more details about that one, maybe create an issue and discuss, and we can follow up there, this idea, and then eventually, well, we can decide what to do with the third one. But the first two, I'm fully supporting the idea of the changing completions and exit codes. Yeah.
I would advise that I think I would, so at a higher level for the second item, I would say, I don't think you're going to get any back pressure from doing it. But if I remember, I think the problem wasn't, I think the issue that Brian had was that Borg does this with an exit code and it's kind of silent, and that's kind of like opaque to end users. So I think maybe termination like how we pass the message or whatever might be a thing, but like I think the general concept that the job should allow you to do it is probably not very controversial.
Okay. All right, I'll follow up with all these three separate. I'll try to create the three separate issues so we can discuss or reuse the one that is already there.
Right. Basically, I would imagine that each of those will be a separate cap, since mostly each of them is pretty broad. Maybe the change completions, but just by the fact that this is changing API, we'll have to go through a separate cap. But the other two, the second one, like I said, we need more. It has to be properly described how this works.
Yes.
And the third one is we don't know full details yet. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Aldo before we jump to another topic? Okay, thanks very much, Aldo. Ravi, you're up next with consolidating workload controller status.
Sure, I hope you guys can hear me. As part of the step, what we would like to do is have the status, the current status that we already have available for deployment controller to be available for stateful sets and daemon sets. The definitions are perhaps going to change a little bit, but I have put most of the information in the KEP. So like if you guys find time, please have a look at it and give me feedback.
My one feedback that I have already, since what we talked and before, and quickly skimming through the CAP, is that the end goal and what I would want to see in the CAP is that this will apply to all the controllers. The fact that you will be starting with daemon sets and stateful sets is an implementation detail that doesn't that we can outline in the implementation details further down in the CAP. But my end goal and the overall description of the CAP, I would propose to put it such that it applies to all the controllers. The fact that deployment already has it doesn't change the overall goal of the CAP.
So do we picture this being broadly applicable to controllers outside of the scope of workload controllers, or are you talking about all workload controllers? Because the concept does, like, all right, and Barney thought a lot about this. I think Eric too did as well a while ago. So the way we communicate status for a service right now, right? Like you once you create the service, you get an IP address, right? But there is no communication that the network programming is actually propagated, right? And some cloud providers, it may not even be possible to get that information. But the idea that controllers have like, I've seen this request to modify the state of the environment some way. I'm making progress on it, and then like I've actually changed something, and then the change is propagated and it's settled to like a nominal good state, like the declarative intent has been reconciled, is kind of a common thing that's broadly applicable across all controllers. But I don't know if workload controllers are kind of a specific one, right? Like, so like, you know, it really is about rolling out pods most of the time. So which problem are you trying to solve with the CAP? Are you trying to do workload controllers, or are you trying to do all of them?
No, when I started out, I was initially thinking of daemon set and stateful set, because for some of the controllers, it is, I mean, they are not going to be consistent with whatever we have for deployment. So when I started with KEP, I had only daemon set and deployment in my head.
I would think at least we want to cover cron, and we'd want to cover the batch workloads as well.
I mean, I was initially thinking all of the workload controllers, since that's what we own. And ideally, I would like to be able to write higher level logic reusing kube primitives, but without the necessity to add conditions, because if I'm creating daemon set, I need to know how to deal with daemon set. When I'm creating deployment, there's a different expectation that I need to look after. When I'm dealing with it, I would like to be able to write a single observer controller, whatever you want to call it, that can read any of the underlying kube controllers and figure out whether it's created, whether it's in progress, or it completed its desired action. So I was initially thinking that at least all the workload controllers, including batch and including both batch. But now that you're talking about it, Ken, I wonder how hard it would be to actually try to prescribe this as a general pattern across the board.
One thing I can do is I can resurface the stuff that Barney and Eric were talking about in terms of trying like to do a status v2 that was broadly applicable across. But I mean, like if we're gonna do something like that, it would really be like they would be expanding the scope of what's proposed here, and it really would be something that we should probably take the SIG architecture, because it would broadly affect all resources, and if it became the expectation, it would affect all custom resources as well, right? It would be the standard for status for everything. So like that is beyond the scope of what we own. We should we would probably take that up a level.
I mean, I would probably pursue both. There's nothing stopping us to do to pursue this along inside of the workloads controllers, and then in parallel we can try to push this further down and across all of the controllers. If the latter fails, we will still have at least the unification inside of our controllers. And maybe over time, people will figure out that this actually makes their lives easier when they're writing higher level controllers or operators, and slowly apply similar principles, not only to their controllers, but pretty much further across the board.
Yeah, to be clear, I think what you're proposing, Nache, is sort of have a status controller for the workloads. And it is responsible for setting up just the status of all the workloads, depending on how the underlying pods, technically, whatever that workload is being run as. Depending on the state of those pods, the status of the higher level controller should be reflected. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, maybe not necessarily a status controller, but basically a status v2 or whatever you want to call it, something that will allow me to have a generic way of stating of figuring out whether any kind of controller is in progress, is created, or completed its action. It's basically, I think you pointed out in your cap those three states, that it's created, it's in progress, and it completed. So
yeah, I mean, those three states, they can be achieved even today in the sense that they can be made consistent across all the controllers.
yeah,
But the definition perhaps is going to change when we are updating the status for those individual controllers. But if you're just talking about the states as such, yes, we can have them for all the workload controllers, although I did not think about the batch ones earlier.
but that would even apply to batch easily, because there's a starting point, there's the in progress, which basically means it's running, and there's a completion date. Maybe cron job is a little bit different because there's no completed, it will be always in progress. Well, modulo suspension for cron job maybe.
Yeah.
But then job is always, it will always fit in nicely within those three states equally.
All right. So I did not think about the job, but I can update the cap with the job statuses as well.
I mean, basically, I would at least start this cap as status for all SIG apps owned controllers. And then in parallel, we can bring this topic over to SIG architecture and see what they think, whether this is something we could pursue or we could recommend initially, because there are other options. When we go to SIG architecture, there are two possible paths, three. SIG architecture says no, and we'll just do it on our own. Or SIG architecture says, yes, this is the requirement for all controllers, or yes, this is the recommended way for controllers. One is a little bit less required than the other one.
Yeah, I think we can pursue both of them parallelly. But the first thing that we need to get within SIG apps is, are we fine with, consensus on the states? Like, are we fine with the states for all the workflow controllers? And are the definitions clear enough to be used for all the controllers? Like, once we get some clarity on that, perhaps we can take this to the SIG Arch, saying that this is the that we have noticed in SIG app space, and I think this will be beneficial to the community.
Yeah, Not hearing any objections, so yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Ravi with regards to those unified statuses?
I have a question. So I know, Mate, you mentioned that these three states might or might not apply to the cron job controller, depending on how we view it. So um, if we are doing this for all controllers, we might want to work out those details of how exactly we would fit the state of cron job like controller, which is doing one thing at sporadic occasions or in time. That would be my only question, is that first, do we need to work out those details for cron job so that we can fit all SIG Apps controllers? And if yes, what are some of the options we have on the states to include?
Yeah, I would imagine the cap outline how the unified statuses map to the current statuses of those resources, because it'll take some time for both the implementation to go through all of them, and secondly, for people that are used to the old statuses, how to translate them to the new ones. And if we write it down, there shouldn't be no doubts how these are translated. So I would imagine this, and probably the cap will be a living document. It won't be something that we will just set in stone once and for all, but it rather it might be evolving as we are implementing those particular statuses for those controllers.
Yeah, makes sense.
Are there any other questions? Okie doke. The next topic, Adam, with cron job for with time zone in cron job.
Right, a very exciting topic. I'm sure everybody really wants to think about time zones. This has been around for a little while. I think we've gone through a few iterations. There's also an external controller called cronjobber that implements this outside of the Kubernetes control plane. But the addition is pretty simple. It's an optional field named time zone that would allow you to use some time zone given by the time zone database, and that would be used versus the system time zone when scheduling the jobs. The idea behind it is obviously pretty simple. It does come with some other complications. I think for users of the API, as far as I know, it's not a breaking change because it's a new optional field. For cluster maintainers, though, there is a bit more of a requirement. I guess you could not have a time zone database and it would just fail to create jobs in time zones, but the expectation would be that cluster maintainers would keep the time zone database up to date as it does change over time, and that would impose some burden on those maintainers. And yeah, I think that's the gist of it. I want to figure out how to keep moving it forward. I know we need to write a KEP, so I'm happy to start working on that, but I'm also happy to hear where folks think this will go wrong, what things we need to think about, and then I can keep track of those.
We actively decided not to do this a couple of releases ago.
Yeah.
So what makes it different now?
I think it was decided that we wouldn't do it primarily because we wanted to, or I think my understanding at the time is we wanted to see if there would be any community consensus around like doing this, and the advisement was to build an external controller to do the same thing. And so that external controller exists now and it's in use by a number of folks, and it's largely unchanged. I think it's really the old implementation of the cron job controller that was just lifted out and ran as a separate process. So to answer your question directly, the only thing that's changed is time and more usage of the external implementation.
Where is the time zone database coming from?
It would be a system package. I know Linux, so it's going to be TZ data if you install that package. On Windows, I'm less familiar with how they keep track of that. I'm sure there's some facility we lean on. In cron job, we lean on the an external, I think it's the robfig cron go package. So, and then there's of course the time zone API from Golang itself. So as long as wherever Go is running has access to that stuff, then we should be okay as far as using the time zone data.
So one of the concerns that we had back then was the fact that we would have to ship the time zone database, which wasn't included and might potentially be different on different systems. The Golang API is only a layer for accessing the TZ database, or Golang is currently actually shipping a time zone database?
I don't think Golang ships the database. I think it accesses the one existing on the system, but I'd need to check that.
So that might be a problem still. I remember from the past that that was one of the main concerns, that enabling this feature and how would system react if someone is trying to use a time zone database and one is not available in the cluster.
Right. I mean, I think in that case, we could basically gracefully degrade to UTC or whatever. I mean, you would need to be using a time zone anyway from the system. So if the system has no time zone, then whatever you're using to pull that time to begin with would also have no time zone. So if you then specified one and tried to look it up, I think the current behavior is to just not schedule that job and report a warning saying, hey, you specified a time zone that doesn't exist or I don't know about. And so it would be that same basic case. Of course, you as a user, you need to know that, hey, I created this cron job and it didn't get scheduled because of this reason, but it should report it through events. I think so. The failure case there should be roughly the same. I mean, you could conceivably, we should be able to make it such that people could define any invalid time zone, whether it's because it doesn't exist or because the time zone database isn't there, and it should fail in the same way to the user. But that makes it complicated, I guess, to diagnose. But
I mean, I would expect that the API server would reject something that is not valid, which would basically mean if you're trying to create a resource which is not valid, either a non-existing database or a database is not there. My only worry is that what happens if the Kube API server for some reason is running on one system which has a database time zone database, but the actual controller logic is running on the kube controller manager, which sits on a node that does not have, because the API server would gladly accept the cron job as perfectly valid, but the controller would not be able to properly respond to it because it wouldn't know how to translate the time zone. These are basically the issues that were mentioned back then.
right. Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's weird edge cases with time zones independent of even that. Like you could have edge cases where even the controller manager could shift between nodes. Databases could be different between those, and it would also fail in that way. Yeah, I think there's a lot of edge cases where that needs to be present and at least somewhat consistent. Luckily, it doesn't change that often, so it isn't. I'd say, like, as far as introducing the burden of keeping this up to date, maintainers of these systems should be keeping system packages up to date anyway for security reasons. So I don't think there's too much burden Like if somebody tells me that my underlying system is way out of date, I'm more concerned about the security implications than I am about the TZ data being out of date. So like, I buy the argument. I understand the edge cases, but for me, there's more important things than is the TZ data there and up to date.
I mean,
So
yeah, go
I
ahead.
guess the problem would be that yes, there would be edge cases, but when somebody does upgrade their time zone information, there's no way for us to figure out that it has been updated, right? So like that, like when the time zone data is missing, it's much more obvious that the data is missing and we are failing. But when that is updated, or in other cases it is outdated, we have no way to figure out that it is outdated, and then the controller is behaving in a wrong way because of this outdated time zone data. That would be much more worrisome, in my opinion, wouldn't it?
Right. I mean, my argument there would be the same: is if the cluster maintainer is not updating TZ data, are they updating other security packages? Like, it seems fairly simple for them to be doing an apt-get update or whatever it is on their system in order to keep that up to date, and they should be doing it regularly. Of course, the edge cases exist, even within, like, if you had just an hour between scheduling something, right? You run into this like possible weird edge cases. I think even now in the cron job controller, time zone related edge cases are not handled. Like, you could specify a cron job that runs at 2 a.m. in Eastern time, and it's going to run twice if you have that, you have your Kubernetes system set at that time zone, right? So we already don't handle time zone related like issues, and then that's not called out anywhere as far as I know. I think it would be important that we do call out these issues as we like add this, of course, because there's already a bunch of caveats with getting jobs scheduled or like and starting deadlines, stuff like that folks need to worry about too. So there's lots of complications here.
Right, but the main idea would be that the time zone is only a user specified. It's only used for by users to specify when they expect this to be run. It's not a time zone. It will be always translated by the controller to most likely UTC and run accordingly.
Right, yeah, it's still going to translate it to UTC because it's got whatever system time it's using, right?
Mm-hmm. So my proposed take is since this was discussed in the SIG architecture, I would want to see their input, especially that cron jobs after GAing are part of the conformance. And we need to ensure that any kube system or any distribution of kube is still conformant if we introduce the requirement for time zones. If they are okay with this, we can push this forward as well. Okay. But I remember they had those issues with regards to the time zone databases. So I would like to hear their opinion on that one. I forgot to check when there is the next SIG architecture call. I'm not sure if this is this week or next week, but it would be good to add it to their agenda. I'll try to make sure to show up there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to attend that and advocate.
I'll ping you on Slack when the SIG architecture next call is, or you can check it out on the Cube Dev calendar.
Okay.
I think from what I'm looking, SIG architecture, the next one is this Thursday. Okay. 29th.
Yeah, that should be fine.
It's 8 p.m. CET, which will be slightly over an hour from today, from what we have currently. on Thursday, 29th.
Okay, I'll mark that. Yeah, that should be fine.
That would be like 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern, I think. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
Okay,
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
cool. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions for Adam? Okay. Our last topic for today is from Sahil about GAing TTL after finish controller.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so basically, this is an old KIP, and the feature was betaed in 1.1. So it's now it's going to be 2 releases in 1.3. So that kind of satisfies the second bullet, which was to stabilize the feature for 2 releases. The first bullet is where I want your thoughts on whether the feature needs to be extended to pods or not. If we decide to keep it specific to jobs, then there is, kind of no implementation change needed per se. So that's basically what I wanted to hear. I tried to look up the meeting notes for when this feature was betaed in January, and there the plan was to push out the part specific changes to a later point in time. But that's basically what the history I got out of the meeting notes.
I remember, but I'll probably I'll refer to Janet to confirm. But there was a discussion about pods, and eventually down the road we said that we're not gonna pursue it, or eventually if we decide, it'll be a separate effort. Janet, do you remember?
Yeah, when we graduate the feature to beta, we decided to, I think what we decided is that we are going to use a different API field for pods. We eventually decide to support pods. So that basically, I think that basically means that if we extend it to pods, then it will be a separate API field that the TTL controller can recognize.
Right, let me chime in. I graduated this feature to beta. The idea is that we could pursue this feature for pods independently. We didn't really need to tie the job with pods because at the end of the day, they are 2 different fields, 2 different API fields. So we got enough feedback that this is required for jobs, so we wanted to graduate this feature for jobs. If there is enough interest for pods, then this could, progress on its own pace separately from jobs. Again, like the fact that they are 2 different API fields allow us to basically have this, separation.
Well, there's also the setting that is on a kube controller manager about pod GC, which we talked about the first point earlier today, which, well, maybe not necessarily is tied with a particular time when a pod is removed, but it's more about how many old pods we keep on a node. And that can easily be overridden by the administrator versus this being a user field where for job it's a little bit more different, and job they have a particular end and there's nothing actually cleaning them, which is not necessarily true for pods itself. So I'll
I think
probably, yeah, go ahead.
I think when I started this proposal in 2018, I tried to make it more generalized. But from the usage, most users want this behavior for jobs, and for pods, it's probably not that much requirement from the community.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I'm reading from the comments, that basically I would graduate to GA as is. And if there will be requests for pods for this particular feature, we can always revisit that one and expand to add the pod functionality into it. But as it is currently, my only question would be, did you check whether there were any complaints? The beta to GA mentioned 2 releases without complaints. So the complaints will be my only question, whether there were any or open issues. If there are, it would be good to make sure that these are addressed. If there's nothing, then yeah, I'm okay with pushing this to GA.
Yeah, so as of today, there are no open issues. Again, 1.2 hasn't gone out fully, so I don't know if somebody will come in with a late issue. So I am okay to do it to closer to feature freeze for 1.2.3, just to keep enough time in hand. Or I do it now and then I back it out. If we see a bunch of issues come in last moment.
So the only thing I had, did we ever make a decision on whether or not to extend it to pods?
I think the consensus that I'm seeing here is that if we, right now there is no ask for pods, so to keep it separate. And if an ask comes in tomorrow, then the feature we can look at the history of this cap and, we know what to do and make it a separate effort.
I just step away for a minute. Did Janet chime in?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we were. Oh,
yeah, go ahead, Janet.
I just want to give Ken our summary. So we were discussing that, and we can graduate with jobs today, and then if in the future we decided that we want to extend to pods, then we can add a new API field and have the controller understand that API field and handle pods as well. So it can be an independent effort.
Yep, that's a very good summary. Does anyone have any questions for Sahil? Okay, hearing none. I guess that's basically covers all of the topics that we had in the agenda. And we're
so just
right
to
on.
clarify, sorry, so is
Yeah,
it
go ahead.
okay for me to raise a pull request to update the cap now?
Yes.
Or okay?
I mean, you can already open a cap for 123.
Okay.
It will get reviewed as we are slowly going forward with 123, and it will merge only after 123 opens.
Okay, got it. Sure.
If you're in doubt at any point in time, feel free to reach out to myself, Janet, or Ken, and we will help you with pushing those through.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And that will be all for today. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you next time. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.